Hey guys. So I'm on the road this week and I'm just trying to keep myself accountable and still show up here, and also still figuring out how to make all of this work. And the fact that I can't read at the same time, so I kind of just have to riff because it's just not natural to me to read. It's also not natural to me to like do these talking heads, so we're figuring out together. Here at Society, we think about the ways in which our relationship to ourselves is outpicturing into the world, because clearly the world's on fire, and to me it's just an illustration of the ways in which we haven't ever really fully settled up with ourselves in a lot of different ways, whether that's post-COVID, whether that is settled up with just the way that we show up in our lives. Like, there's work to do, and I feel like the work is right in front of us. Let's start here. Let me ask you this: how do you know that you can believe the shit that you say to yourself? And I'm not asking, keep in mind, I'm not asking, like, do you know that you shouldn't believe every thought that you have? That's the therapy space, right? That's like, you don't have to believe every thought. Great information, very good intel, key, but there's a step beyond that. It's not only about knowing that you don't need to believe every thought that you have. How do we get into a good enough relationship with ourselves and our minds and our bodies and our spirit that we actually know that we can, or we know when we can? Like, what is that dance? Because to me, that's the situation we need to get ourselves into so that we can start navigating in real time as a group. We can't do that. That's why we sit up here and we're talking about like this policy and this organizing strategy, all very important. But we're still coming from this mindset of, let's just fight against whatever they're giving to us, as opposed to figuring out, like, what are we actually trying to build? Because again, I am not convinced that at this exact point, even if Donald Trump were to just suddenly evaporate, and obviously based on the history of America itself, that like where we are as states of being, as people, mentally, emotionally, culturally, socially, relationally, that we wouldn't end up just building something very fucking similar to what we're experiencing right now, because we haven't actually taken the time to shift the conversation. Who are we? What are we doing? How do we go about narrating this experience of figuring it out as we go? How do we evolve beyond what we know? And how do we put that in context with our social setting? Because it can't exist. Our personal change and our social change are the exact same conversation. And until we figure out how to have that both with ourselves and together, we're spinning our wheels. And so I don't know that I have the exact plan or methodology. I think this you, yours, ours framework is really helpful for me because it helps me draw a straight line, and that's kind of what I want to use here. But like, it can look different for everybody. But the reality is we have to figure out how to get into the habit of recognizing the stories that we tell ourselves and the ways in which we are consuming our own bullshit, whether it is with regard to kind of like what's happening in the world and what is possible, what is not possible, whether it's regard to like how it is that we're showing up in our lives and in our relationships, whether, and like whether we are the people that we say that we are, or whether we even want to be the people that we say that we are. And so it is hard for me to move forward in this moment because I feel like it's almost like there's an elephant in the room when it comes to like the work that we're all doing on an everyday basis to try to figure out how the fuck it is that we show up as ourselves and be seen and see others, and also recognizing the fact that like all of our shit is a shade of gray. And again, that contradiction to me is our compass. That is what shows us what our cutting edges are in terms of where it is that we are actually evolving as a society. We will not be able to compete with AI and the computing power of that if we don't start getting our arms around how it is that we stay in conversation with our own humanity. But instead, we tell these stories. And again, stories are what help us make sense of the world. You know what I mean? Stories are what help us make sense of ourselves and each other, but sometimes they're just so fucking narrow. And sometimes we end up telling ourselves a version of a story that ends up being so much more limited than it could be. We do that in our lives in terms of who we say that we are based on like what our past experiences are or who our parents were, etc., as opposed to being like, yeah, that is all helpful context, but it's the details. Like, those aren't the deciding factors. Like, our mental and emotional now are the deciding factors, and we need to start figuring out how to operate from a more empowered space and feel like that is actually our civic or social responsibility as we give shape to our immediate world.